Welcome to the CPD Grab Bag, in which we're going to briefly be thinking about multiple choice quizzes. So Little and colleagues 2012 say this: properly constructed multiple choice practice tests can be important learning events for students. Why is that? Well, multiple choice quizzes, MCQs, are really useful for retrieval practice and getting the students to get down on paper what they already know and what they've learned recently. Really useful in terms of activating prior knowledge. They're obviously reusable once you've made them. Might take a little bit of time and energy to make a good multiple choice quiz, but you've got them then in the bank for future use. Useful for comparisons between students within a group, across groups, and also for one student to compare their prior achievement to their current achievement and see if they've made any progress. They're also obviously really easy to mark because there's right or wrong answers quite clearly. It gives you a bit of quick feedback in class, which can be really helpful. It can be obviously used diagnostically, which we'll perhaps talk about in another session. And also sometimes you'll find that they can spark discussions, especially where common misconceptions can be addressed. So how do we do it then? I'm going to give you three things to think about. There are plenty more, and I'll come back to those in a second. But initially, three things to think about in terms of the way you ask your questions in your MCQs. So the first thing is that all answers should be plausible. So here's a silly example, but you'll get the idea. So which is the largest artery in the human body? You can see there option D is Belgium. Now that's clearly a nonsense example, but having implausible answers, all that does is it means the students are more likely to guess the correct answer. And if you've got students guessing the correct answer, that becomes a problem for you as a teacher because you're not sure whether they've learned that thing or whether they've simply guessed correctly. So by having implausible choices or implausible options in there, that just makes that slightly more likely that the students will guess correctly, and then you're not really sure what to do with that information then. So we'll try and avoid that if we can. Instead, obviously, make sure the answers are all plausible. So that's the first thing. All answers should be plausible. Secondly, you should try as much as possible to avoid double negatives, and the essential point here is that the question should be as clear as possible. So here's a question that has double negatives in. Which of the following is not true? I don't like sandwiches, I haven't been to Spain, I cannot ride a bike, I do not speak Welsh. Now if you're anything like me, that sort of sends my brain into a little bit of a spin, trying to work out how the double negatives work together. So it's much more straightforward, therefore, to have something like this. Which of the following is true? And in this case, you can include some negatives in the options because they're not double negatives. It's much more plain and easy to understand. Thirdly, the question stem should not contain irrelevant information. There's no need to have a lengthy question stem, particularly for a multiple choice quiz where you're just after a bit of retrieval practice and just trying to maybe even diagnose what the students do and don't. No, you don't want to add to their cognitive load by giving them a bunch of irrelevant information. So that might look like this, again, a slightly silly example, but after 3 days hiking in the peaks with my friend, I saw the most common English bird of prey. What's it called? It's much more simple to say what is the most common English bird of prey. Number one, all answers should be plausible. Number two, we need to avoid double negatives in our MCQs, and the question stem should not contain irrelevant information. How do we do it? Well, I usually have a single sheet of A4. It can be single-sided or double-sided. Usually I'll ask the students to do it as individuals because then it gives me actionable information. But sometimes if maybe we're early on in a topic, I might allow them to do it in pairs. And then that gives me at least a feel for how the group is getting on with that particular topic. If there are common misconceptions amongst the group, it's a quick way of diagnosing that. One really great thing about MCQs is they can be done online. Microsoft Forms and Google Forms both have the capacity to have self-marking quizzes, which we can talk about another time. But that would be really useful. The students can be set it even for homework, and then they can get instant feedback on their answers. So if you want to know any more, there's a couple of papers here and several blog posts, or if you'd prefer to, you can contact me on my college email address. So that's it for the CPD Grab Bag this time, multiple choice quizzes. I hope that was helpful. See you in the next one.